Hello and welcome to the second season of AUA Focus Series, a podcast channel by the AUA Media Lab. I am Narek Ohanyan, a senior computer science student at AUA, and today I am joined by a very honorable guest, Silvia Mestroni, officer in charge for the representative of UNICEF in Armenia. Dear Silvia, it's a privilege to have you today. You have dedicated your entire career to international development, child protection, and human rights, navigating these cross-cutting issues in our society. And here we are living in very complicated times, and I know how is it to take in charge on this. And today I want us to discuss not just the gravity of these issues, but how the most vulnerable among us, the children and youth, are both bearing the brunt of this issue, but also stepping up to change it. Welcome to the AUA Media Lab.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for hosting this interview. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. And for the beginning, I want us to look at the physical reality of our world. Our humanity has built its entire societal infrastructure, our economy, our agriculture, even human rights and legal frameworks are built for a climate map that simply no longer exists. And we need adaptation and mitigation here. And I want to ask, from the perspective of UNICEF as an international organization that has the mandate to protect the future, how do you adapt your frameworks to protect children and youth? And how do you address this crisis? And what you do to protect children when their very map of their environment is gone? And how do you see children and youth as the agents for this change?
Thank you. Very interesting question and very important question. And of course, climate change is changing the reality for children, and that's why we cannot ignore it, absolutely. As the UN agency mandated for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, for UNICEF it is extremely important to also address issues around climate change. We actually, here in Armenia, we started to work on climate change and related topics because, of course, environmental, pollution, etc., also somehow connect to that some 5-6 years ago. And I think the first step at that time was trying to understand the reality and answer some questions that at that moment were unanswered. So we started with research, actually, to better understand what was the understanding of climate change, what did people, like both adults and children, adolescents, knew about climate change, what concerns they had, and also to understand to what extent they would be interested to activate themselves. So that research actually highlighted that while both more or less adults and also children more than adults knew about climate change and somewhat its consequences, but the level of deeper understanding of that and also the willingness to activate, those indicators really showed us that there was really room for improvement. And so the first entry point was education. Because education is also the channel, especially through schools, that can reach more immediately a large number of children and adolescents, as well as young people. So we started working with the Ministry of Education on institutionalizing tools that could support the teaching of around climate change. So actually, back in 2022, 2 manuals were developed together with the Ministry of Education and its institutions to make sure that teachers had these additional tools. Also, a training of teachers through the national system of training, internal training, was developed so that also these manuals don't remain only on the shelves, but really can be utilized. And the Ministry of Education actually issued an order in 2023 where basically 2 credits were assigned to teachers that take this training course, which means it is an incentive for teachers to take this course and to apply this, which is also an important contribution in the education for the education system to start disseminating more and more concepts around climate change, and it's a way to raise awareness, obviously. There are other aspects besides research and education, but maybe for now I will stop here because we work also on other areas, of course.
Thank you. It's very, very interesting and very, very important. And coming back to the understanding that you mentioned, I believe that there is cognitive dissonance in our society in regards of how we see climate change, because we often look at climate change as an environmental issue like greenhouse gas emissions, melting ice, etc. But in reality, it's a fundamental human rights crisis, especially child rights crisis. What UNICEF does to show policymakers and the public in general that climate change is a real threat to the health, education, and basic survival of every child.
I really agree with you. It is also a child rights crisis because around the world we see storms, floods, and other phenomena, heat waves that really affect children's lives, affecting their livelihoods, their family ability to provide for their well-being, and also it affects their health very often. So UNICEF globally, not only in Armenia, back in 2023 looked particularly the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child started to formalize a normative framework to really recognize that also the right to a safe environment, considering also climate change implications, is part of the list of child rights. And that's when what is the general comment number 26 was issued. This was, as I said, in 2023. And it basically determines the responsibility of member states, meaning the countries that have signed the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to address this issue in the interest of today's children and also in the interest of tomorrow's children. Because we know that this is an intergenerational issue. So in line with that, of course, UNICEF Armenia has been also engaging with policymakers to make sure that also in the country, normative frameworks really are able to capture the aspects that of climate change and environmental issues that affect children. And we have been contributing to the law on climate policy that was recently adopted, as well as what is the nationally determined contributions. And we are now working also to embed child rights aspects and considerations into the National Adaptation Plan that is upcoming. A new version is upcoming for Armenia. I also want to mention when it comes to sort of trying to support the country in considering the child rights perspective and the point of view of children. And when I say children, I also mean adolescents, but also young people. We have collaborated with the Ministry of Environment in the establishment of the Climate Change Youth Advisory Board that is mandated to basically maintain a platform where children, adolescents, young people can contribute with their opinions, and the members of the board are regularly working with the Ministry of Environment to bring the perspectives from their communities, from their peers in their communities when it comes to climate change. The board has also contributed to some of the regulatory frameworks that I mentioned, particularly the law on climate. There are some provisions that came really as a input from the board.
Thank you. And the work for every child is really crucial. But apart from climate change, we see also a global surge in conflicts. And here in Armenia, especially, we know the consequences of it and the intergenerational log of the conflict. And when societies crash, children and youth are caught under crossfire. How UNICEF, as an international organization responsible for child protection, and governments at large, go beyond the performative inclusion of young people in peace-building negotiations and they actually grant the real institutional power to change something?
Thank you for this question, because I think it is very important to discuss how child, adolescent, youth participation is handled. And it's valid for topics like climate change, peace, but any other topic that may be of interest to children and young people. I think that based on my experience, the right to child participation, and when I say child, I mean also young people, is easy to misunderstand because it requires a deconstruction of how we have, as societies, how we have operated with the role of adults and the role of children and adolescents. When it comes to the right to child participation, as the Convention on the Rights of the Child looks at it, some principles are really important. And the Convention wants to see genuine participation, which is very different from sometimes what we see in many countries. I would say in all the countries, because as I said, it can be really difficult to understand completely this right. One important principle is that children need to be put from the beginning in a position to understand what is going on. So sometimes children are put, like you see around the world, children with pamphlets in strikes. Just an adult wrote that pamphlet and that is cute. It attracts attention. It's Instagrammable. But is that right? Is that child right to participation? Is that a good way to implement that right? It is not really in line with what the convention says. So for the child to be really first of all, the child needs to be really be put in a position to understand, which means having information and having information that is accessible to the child, that is understandable to the child. And the other important principle is that child or adolescent youth participation is a two-way street. It is not only about children or adolescents saying their opinion, but there needs to be also an answer from the adult side. And I can explain more on that. So genuine participation, really needs to be careful and to make sure that we don't get into manipulative approaches or even decorative or tokenistic approaches.
Sure, and about the genuine participation. As a student myself, I often see the real hunger for agency on campus. And also, on the other hand, activism without actual a seat at the table can lead to a burnout. Mm-hmm. How meaningfully engage young people and regularly engage young people and children to actually grant the access to change something and meaningfully and genuine for the genuine participation, actually.
Yes, I fully agree with you that one of the risks of establishing mechanisms of participation that are not exactly genuine, as I described, based on the principles that I described. One of the risks is that we are creating frustration because one of the objectives of the right to participation is also in the future have children that are citizens, contributing citizens with agency, etc. The other is that it's a present, the right, children have the right today also to participate. So the risk is to create frustration and to defeat the purpose. As I said, the three principles that I mentioned are the minimum standard. And what we see, what is important is that mechanisms that are promoted try to really, as much as possible, look at these standards. And there are many examples around the world. For example, and I'm because I used to work on this topic many years back, so some examples are maybe, from the past. In Brazil, for example, children have been involved in participatory budgeting. So municipalities, what in Armenia would be consolidated communities, would be involved in determining how the local authorities distribute their budget for a certain portion of the budget, of course, not the entire budget, based on the needs of the children or adolescents in the community. There are several examples of children being involved in constitutional reforms in various countries. I myself was involved in one in the past. There are many examples of genuine participation, and as I said, the important thing is that these mechanisms respect these these principles. I think in Armenia, I really cannot make a long list because there are now many initiatives. I can speak more for those that UNICEF has a direct eye on. And I think that really the Children's Council, the Youth Advisory Board adjacent to the Ministry of Environment that I mentioned earlier, as well as the Children's Council adjacent to the Human Rights Defender Office, both mechanisms have been really conceived and they continue to work considering these minimum standards. There is also another element to child participation that is once minimum standards are defined, are, let's say, more or less respected, there are also levels of participation. And it's, the minimum level is typically adults start the initiative and they invite children to participate in a mechanism that is an adult mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. But there are also cases where children initiate themselves, plan from scratch, and they basically create a mechanism that is conceived by them. I think in Armenia there is one example, and it's the ELCOI conference, and you can speak more about that because you were part of that. I think that event was really conceived. Of course, it is a mechanism that exists around the world, and it's connected to the COP on climate change. But the ideation of the conference, the planning, what topics should be discussed, how, etc., that was all conceived and planned by adolescents and young people. And I think that is a really great example of youth participation. It's important also to model positive examples so that also other initiatives can really interpret the right to child participation in the correct way.
Thank you. I want slightly to pivot from your role as the deputy representative of UNICEF to your journey. The international development world and the negotiations, humanitarian work, especially when it comes to top-level crisis, is often male-dominated. How your journey as a woman in the field of humanitarian and developmental work was, and how it helped to shape your current approach to youth engagement and youth policy?
I started to work for UNICEF at the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic some 20-something years ago, 21 years ago. And then I went from there to Central Asia, and then I was more or less in this region, and then I landed in Armenia 5 years ago now. So I think this journey around different countries and regions of the world was an important experience to understand different realities and how different realities also may be preserving good opportunities for children, but also sometimes situations that really require improvement for the well-being of children. When I started back in the Dominican Republic, I actually started from child and adolescent participation. So I feel quite, attached to this topic. And it was really important to see the things that I described before, the principles that I mentioned. Child participation is a two-way street, and we really need to make sure that as adults we don't fall into the trap of, using child participation as a decoration, as something symbolic, but it's really important to give the opportunity to children to express their right to an opinion. And we understand that there are different ages that can understand and can create an opinion on different topics, but that, of course, should be nuanced. And I think also that experience starting at UNICEF from that experience was very helpful because at the end of the day, child participation is in every single area that UNICEF works in. It's in education, it's in child protection, it's when a child is present in a school. It's when a child, for example, needs to be protected in a court because they are involved in is either as a witness or as a person affected by a trial, for example. But also, of course, in situations where there are big world issues like climate change, like peace, like the Sustainable Development Goals, like equality and leave no one behind. There are many topics where, children have been involved and the right to participation has been opened up to them around the world, and it remains important that they can express their views around these topics because, as we said before, there are issues that are intergenerational issues and they will affect their future.
Right to participation is very vital, especially when there is this intersectionality. What about gender perspectives and how the gendered normatives usually affect the participation of young women and also young boys and young men in Armenia? What do you think, and how UNICEF addresses this issue?
Yes, this is an important question. And of course, societies around the world. There is probably not much exception to different degrees, but countries around the world do assign roles to boys and to girls, and typically different roles. And of course, this affects how peers, the society, see and interpret also the dynamics in the mechanisms for child and adolescents and young people participation when it comes to girls and to boys. I think we need to refrain also, I think, to think that this is the problem only for girls. Of course, it is true that girls, for example, in many societies are not expected to be loud or to be very opinionated, especially on some topics. But also maybe boys sometimes also may not be expected to have an opinion on certain topics. And also maybe boys may not be expected to express certain things with certain emotions, right? Because boys will be future men. They are not expected to have, to show weakness, etc. So I think it's important to take care of both aspects and to make sure that the mechanisms we promote are mechanisms that feel like safe spaces, that are spaces where both boys and girls really know that they can express their opinions in whichever way, and also also they can address any topic that they feel is important to them. I fully agree with you.
I want to push a bit on how to achieve meaningful participation, and safe spaces are an integral part of that. And you have mentioned also international treaties that mandate youth voice and children voice to be heard and respected. But sometimes at the table, you need to talk the adult talk as a young person to be understood and to be heard. What is your perspective on that, and how UNICEF tries to evolve the capacity of young people sometimes to do this adult talk?
Thank you. This allows me to go back to one of the points that we discussed earlier, and that I think is really critical. And it's true. I mean, and this is exactly what you just mentioned is exactly linked to what I said earlier, that child and youth participation are a two-way street. And also that one of the preconditions for genuine participation is that children and young people need to be put in a condition to have sufficient and adequate information to be able to form their opinions. These, I think, are extremely important principles and preconditions. Otherwise, really we risk that, it's in a room of adults where some discussions take place. It's nice to have children sitting there. It is, as I said, Instagrammable maybe, but it doesn't really help with fully realizing the right to child and youth participation. So going back to what I mentioned, I think it's really important that organizations that promote genuine mechanisms for participation really make sure that we don't only work with children and adolescents, but adults also need to be, I don't want to use the word educated, but they need also to have new tools that none of us adults have been used to have, to be able to engage genuinely in this process, so that it is truly a two-way process. Because we may have situations where the child or an adolescent, a young person, expresses the opinion, and but then we need also adults in whatever situation. It can be in the family, it can be in a small community or a small group, or in a broader societal mechanism. And we need to make sure that adults understand how to listen, because we really need to make sure that also we change the register of, our normal standard way of discussing and hearing about certain topics, and also to understand that children may express certain opinions in a different way, right? And we have lost that because we were all children, but we may have forgotten that, because often, of course, the way a child expresses something may sound simplistic, but if we are really trained to listen, we can find what a child is really meaning. What is the preoccupation behind that? And I can give an example. When I started in the Dominican Republic, that country had a significant problem of child abuse. And in some communities, we had to start mapping out where children moved and where threats would be. And basically, children would tell us, "Oh, but I don't like walking to school through that street." And at the beginning, that sounded as if, because the other street was along the seashore, so it's just simply nicer, etc. But so the point is, we did not take that answer that sounded as it's just a simplistic answer, like this is nicer because the sea is there, and there were some playgrounds on the way, etc. But it was important to understand why that other street was uncomfortable, and that's where some activities were taking place that constituted a threat for children. This is just a very simple and example more of everyday life to say that we adults need to make an effort to understand children. I'm sure many parents also understand what I'm saying, but when we are translating this into a more formal mechanism where children are actually trying to express an opinion on a policy, on a decision, an important decision that is important for the community, then it becomes more complicated. So I think that genuine participation that is not just sitting there as a decoration, really means working with adults to be better trained to really receive the opinions, and also to later take them into account in the decisions that are made. Now, we all understand that in managing a family, a group, a society, there are many aspects to be taken into account. So perhaps sometimes an opinion is expressed, but of course solutions are limited and the concern may not be addressed. This is fully understandable. But then a feedback needs to, and sometimes, this happens for adults in the society, but it doesn't necessarily happen with children because we may not see them as our constituents. And when we speak about the importance of making sure that children, as a precondition, children, adolescents, young people, have access to adequate information and sufficient information, it means also making sure that the information is delivered in a way that is understandable to them. And I would say that at least among the mechanisms that I know in Armenia, the youth houses or the youth centers that, by the way, are now regulated by the new law on youth policy that was adopted 1 year ago. These youth houses and youth centers constitute important platforms for children and young people to research, to also discuss informally, and really search for that kind of information.
Speaking of the bringing experience, whether it is technical or just a lived one, to the table, there is an unprecedented opportunity coming up for Armenian youth and children and for Armenia as a country. The 17th Convention of Parties on Biological Diversity in October 2026. Yerevan will become the hub of international negotiations on biodiversity conservation. And how do you see the meaningful participation of youth and children in shaping the agenda of negotiations and taking part in these negotiations?
Thank you. Yes, this is really important because, of course, this event is quite emblematic for Armenia and a great opportunity for the country and also for children, adolescents, young people. Biodiversity is also very much linked to the climate change agenda, and it is really timely as we see that the world is running out of time on these topics, right? In these mechanisms and in the COP, the community of practice mechanisms for climate change, for biodiversity, there are established mechanisms that give the opportunity also to young people to contribute. And these are either through the national delegation of each country. And in the past, as UNICEF, we have supported at the COP on climate change, participation of young people together as part of the national delegation of Armenia. And we are working also in the direction of making sure that for COP17 there is hopefully also a larger delegation since it is in the country. So for young people to be part of the national delegation. There is also an opportunity through NGOs to be admitted through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in the mechanisms for discussion around this topic. And I'm sure that as we come closer to the event, more information can be shared for those that are interested. But also in the lead up to this event, there will be also preparatory stages where there can be discussions involving adolescents, young people, to prepare for the event. And one of these is the Local Conference of Youth, which is the LCOI, and I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't explain what it was. The Local Conference of Youth, and you know very well, Narek, please also complement me in explaining what it is. But basically, it is a mechanism to make sure that young people have the opportunity to discuss specific issues related to climate change, but in this case also on biodiversity, to be able to raise concerns that are maybe specific to their communities where they live, etc., so that these concerns can also be brought at the attention of the decision makers at the global level, in the discussions that will take place at the conference that in this case is in October here in Armenia on biodiversity. So I think that there are a number of mechanisms also that can give the opportunity to prepare before and not just to open a space at the event only. And I think through the advisory board adjacent to the Ministry of Environment that I mentioned earlier, also several initiatives are being currently planned. And I think in the coming months, more information will be made available to the more wider young people's public, so that really those who are interested in this topic can activate themselves and also access these opportunities. And I don't know, Narek, maybe there are other things I don't recall in this moment, but that constitute real opportunities for this event that, as I said, is a great chance for Armenia and the young people in Armenia. And as UNICEF, we really look forward to support from our side.
Silvia, this has been an incredibly grounding and astonishing conversation. Thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you do for children of Armenia and globally. If there is anything that you would like to mention that we didn't touch on, the stage is yours.
Thank you. And I think we have said many things. I just want to thank you for this opportunity, but also for your active engagement in many ways, and including in some of the platforms that I have mentioned for Armenia. And good luck to you. Good luck also to all the young people, maybe also adolescents, children that may be listening at some point to this podcast. And thank you very much again.
Thank you, and thank you for joining me on the AUA Focus series. See you next time.
Thank you.